Last time we spoke about the fall of Manila. General LeMay's B-29 bombers wreaked havoc on Japan, targeting key factories at a high cost. On February the 19th, U.S. Marines landed on Iwo Jima, facing fierce Japanese resistance and heavy casualties. By February the 23rd, after relentless fighting and harsh conditions, they raised the American flag atop Mount Suribachi, marking a hard-won victory. This moment inspired a legacy for the Marine Corps, as battles raged on in the Pacific. Meanwhile, troops attached to General Kobayashi's defenses at Mounts Pagawakan and Mataba struggled to gain ground. Reinforcements arrived, leading to a coordinated assault, but progress was slow. Meanwhile, General Yamashita reorganized his forces in response to increased guerrilla activity. As American divisions advanced, they faced fierce resistance but gradually secured key positions. Guerrilla leader Volkmann disrupted Japanese supply lines, significantly impacting their operations. Amidst the chaos, a daring rescue mission freed over 2,000 internees, though it provoked brutal reprisals against civilians. This episode is The Great Tokyo Air Raid. Welcome back to the Pacific War podcast week by week, and I'm your dutiful host, Greg Watson. Before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about World War II? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on World War II, and so much more, so go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube, and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, if you're still hungry for some more history after that, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War found on all major podcast platforms. Over on YouTube, I just released a really silly episode explaining how to play the USSR in the board game Axis and Allies. And over on Echoes of War, we just finished our 4-part series covering who are the best and worst generals, admirals, and air commanders of World War II. And hey, if you'd like to further support me, please check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. This month's exclusive podcast is How the Sicilian Mafia Helped the Allies During World War II. Today we are continuing with the ongoing battle over Iwo Jima. By the end of February, Colonel Liversedge's 28th Marines had successfully secured Mount Suribachi, while the other regiments from the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions advanced towards the O2 line, which was situated just beyond Airfield No. 2. This location was where General Kobayashi maintained his primary defensive positions, which were heavily fortified with caves, tunnels, and traps. On March the 1st, General Rocky continued his offensive on the left flank, as the fresh 28th Marines moved through the weary 27th Marines, led by Colonel Warnham, and they launched an assault on Hill 362A and its adjacent positions. The Corps' 155mm howitzers and 5th Divisional Artillery commenced firing a preparation at K-45 minutes. One battleship and 2 cruisers from the gunfire and covering force added their heavy fires from 8 o'clock to about 8:30. Aircraft from the support carrier group delivered strikes throughout the day, but did not participate in the preparation for the attack. This proved to be one of the busiest days for Task Force 54 since D-Day, as fire support ships dueled with enemy shore batteries until the late afternoon. Shortly after dawn, enemy guns in the northern part of the island opened up, and at 7:25, the destroyer Terry took a direct hit from a 6-inch shell, suffering heavy casualties. The battleship Nevada immediately engaged these hostile installations, and after completing their mission in support of the landing force, the cruisers Indianapolis and Pensacola shifted to counter-battery fire. At 10:25, the destroyer Column was hit by a major caliber projectile, and soon after this, enemy shells straddled the destroyer Stemble. Counter-battery fire continued throughout the day, with the Nevada destroying one casemated gun and starting a fire in another emplacement, while Pensacola's batteries accounted for a third of the Japanese guns. Following the robust aerial, naval, and artillery bombardment, Liversedge's forces achieved some initial success, including capturing the hilltop, but they were ultimately halted by intense machine gun fire from the Nishi Ridge to the north. However, the 3rd Battalion along the coast managed to advance approximately 350 yards against lighter resistance. Within the center, General Erskine had pressed forward beyond Airfield No. 2, with Colonel Withers' 21st Marines advancing north and northeast about 500 yards into the incomplete Airfield No. 3. At the same time, General Cates continued to send his troops into the fray. Colonel Jordan's 24th Marines replaced Colonel Wessinger's exhausted 23rd Marines on the left that had fought to dislodge the enemy from Hill 382. They succeeded in advancing about 100 yards along the division's left boundary and 50 yards on the right, establishing a foothold on the elevated terrain overlooking Minami village. Further to the south, Colonel Lanigan committed his 1st Battalion to eliminate the salient around the amphitheater and Turkey Knob, but this assault was again met with fierce Japanese resistance. This relief enabled Erskine to initiate a 2-regiment offensive with the 21st Marines on the left and Colonel Kenyon's 9th Marines on the right, although this effort did not achieve any significant progress. The following day, the assault persisted, but the 9th Marines made minimal headway against a strong enemy position on the right, while the 21st Marines advanced towards the base of Hill 362B and the southern edge of Airfield No. 3. Concurrently, Lirege's 28th Marines successfully cleared Hill 362A and moved towards Nishi Ridge, where they repelled a fierce counterattack by over 150 Japanese soldiers. Colonel Graham's 26th Marines were once again deployed to fill the gap between the 3rd and 5th Marine Divisions, managing to gain about 500 yards to the north. Jordan's 24th Marines finally captured Hill 382 and advanced about 300 yards on the left. Meanwhile, Lanigan's 1st Battalion made another unsuccessful attempt to infiltrate and take the high ground north of the Turkey Knob. As described by an intelligence officer with the 4th Marine Division, as a result of the close study of the enemy's recent defensive action, aided by observation from OPs and air reconnaissance, the following explanation is suggested of the enemy's defenses in the division's Z of A. The enemy remains below ground in his maze of communicating tunnels throughout our preliminary artillery fires. When the fires cease, he pushes OPs out of the entrances not demolished by our fires. Then, choosing a suitable exit, he moves as many men and weapons to the surface as he can, depending on the cover and concealment of that area, often as close as 75 yards from our front. As our troops advance towards this point, he delivers all the fire at his disposal, rifle, machine gun, and mortar. When he has inflicted sufficient casualties to pin down our advance, he then withdraws through this underground tunnels most of his forces, possibly leaving a few machine gunners and motors. Meanwhile, our BN Co. has coordinated his direct support weapons and deliveries, a concentration of rockets, motors, and artillery. Our tanks then push in, supported by infantry. When the hot spot is overrun, we find a handful of dead Japs and a few, if any, enemy weapons. When this is happening, the enemy has repeated the process and another section of our advance is engaged in a vicious firefight, and the cycle simply continues. Meanwhile, the remainder of the 25th Marines managed to advance 300 yards along the coast, facing pretty much no opposition. On March the 3rd, the capture of Hill 362A enabled flamethrower tanks to assist in the advance northwards. The 5th Marine Division prepared to press on with its assaults upon Nishi Ridge and Hill 362B. The majority of the 20th Marines faced strong resistance as they moved forward over 200 yards. Lirege's 1st Battalion and Graham's 1st Battalion executed a coordinated attack to take the main enemy positions ahead of them. Meanwhile, the remainder of the 26th Marines surged forward, achieving a gain of over 500 yards, which allowed them to relieve Kenyon's 3rd Battalion and secure the summit of Hill 362B. Within the center, the 9th Marines remained in a stalemate, with the 21st Marines launching a vigorous attack to the northeast, successfully capturing the summit of Hill 357 at the eastern edge of the Motoyama Plateau. They then attempted another assault southeast towards Hill 362C, which resulted in a modest gain of about 250 yards. Meanwhile, in the 4th Marine Division sector, Wessinger's 23rd Marines were deployed in the center, where determined Japanese defenders continued to thwart intense American assaults, despite the partial reduction of the Turkey Knob blockhouse. To the left, the 24th Marines resumed their offensive going southeast, advancing up about 350 yards in the center. During the 8 days of the deadlock, the fierce conflict in the Hill 382 area and the Turkey Knob areas saw weather generally being favorable to them. Mild temperatures and fair skies predominated, although early in the morning, ground haze combined with smoke limited observation, and only on a few days light showers fell in the afternoon. Night temperatures sometimes went below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and it was then that the tired Marines were grateful for the characteristic subterranean heat of the island that warmed their foxholes. The next day, March the 4th, dawned gray and sullen, with intermittent showers falling with overcast skies. Visibility was so limited that airstrikes were canceled and aerial observation seriously was curtailed. Over on the right, Kate's Marines pressed the attack southeast but could only gain about 150 yards against the defenders' fierce resistance. To the left, after a failed Japanese infiltration attempt overnight to gather food and water, both the 9th and 21st Marines made no progress with their costly eastward assault. Finally, supported closely by flame-throwing tanks and combat engineers, Rocky's Marines fought fiercely but achieved only minor advances, prompting Wernham's 27th Marines to be thrown back into the battle to reinforce the two battered assault regiments. March the 5th was then dedicated to reorganizing and resupplying the 3 Marine divisions in preparation for a renewed effort the next day. Additionally, the reserve 3rd Marines, led by Colonel James Stewart, were sent back to Guam without having landed on Iwo Jima. The 3 divisions accordingly resumed their offensive on March the 6th after a terrific artillery and naval gunfire bombardment. First on the left, Erskine attacked with his 3 regiments abreast, yet failed to make any significant advance. Then in the center, the 9th and 21st Marines likewise unsuccessfully attacked Hill 362C, though the latter managed to clear the entire Hill 357 area. Lastly, Wensinger's 23rd Marines passed through the 24th on the division's left and pressed on forward against heavy opposition, successfully gaining between 150 to 350 yards, while Joran's battalion gained up to 150 yards in their front. Additionally, the 25th Marines mopped up the area, and Kate's Provisional Battalion kept hammering against the amphitheater Turkey Knob area. In the knowledge that the battle was swinging irrevocably in favor of the Americans, General Kobayashi radioed Tokyo this: "Our strong points might be able to fight delaying actions for several more days. I comfort myself a little seeing my officers and men die without regret after struggling in this inch-by-inch battle against an overwhelming enemy." The general's predictions were, if anything, on the pessimistic side, as his garrison would prolong the battle for another 3 weeks. Although the fighting was dragged terribly, on this day Brigadier General Ernest Moore successfully landed on Airfield No. 1, alongside 28 P-51s and 16 P-61s of the 15th Fighter Group to take control of the island air activities. The following day, the island commander, Major General James Chaney, assumed responsibility for base development, air defense, and operations of the airfields. Meanwhile, Schmidt was continuing his coordinated offensive with the 28th Marines, meeting only scattered resistance as they pushed 500 yards north. The 26th Marines overran enemy defenses and gained about 150 yards before resistance stiffened once again. The 27th Marines attacked on a narrow front, but likewise gained only 150 yards. The 21st Marines achieved tactical surprise to reach Hill 331 and then pushed 250 yards more to Hill 362C, which was ultimately seized as well. The 9th Marines ferociously attacked east but gained only 200 yards because rain of fire stopped them. The 23rd Marines recovered from a savage Japanese night counterattack and then pushed around 150 yards against strong resistance. The 24th Marines only progressed over 50 yards as they neutralized a number of enemy defenses, and the 25th Marines and the Provisional Battalion continued their secondary operations against the amphitheater Turkey Knob area. On March the 8th, Rocky pressed on towards the northeast coast, with the 28th Marines advancing against minimal resistance, gaining between 300 and 500 yards along the shoreline. Meanwhile, the 26th Marines faced a complete stalemate against the intricate network of pillboxes and interconnected caves that had once comprised the village of Kita. The 27th Marines managed to advance approximately 150 yards with tank support, and within the center, the 21st Marines shifted northeast again, successfully gaining about 300 yards through the last organized resistance in the area, while the 9th Marines captured Hill 362C and continued their eastward assault, reaching the edge of the plateau overlooking the beach and initiating a flanking maneuver south of Hill 331. Over on the right flank, the 23rd and 24th Marines continued their attacks but made little headway against the enemy's formidable defenses. On the night of the 8th, General Senda launched a strong counterattack that caught the Americans completely off guard. 2 of Senda's orderlies would survive and report what occurred during that very daring counterattack. Many of his troops believed that Inoue was a superior leader who inspired his men to perform outstanding feats of bravery. Others thought he was a complete maniac. The sight of the stars and stripes flying atop Mount Sotobachi had filled him with increasing rage, as he was quoted to say, "We shall destroy their banner. We shall replace it with ours, in the name of the great emperor and the great people of Japan." Inoue was in charge of the Naval Guard Force, who manned the shore guns and sank and damaged many of the U.S. warships and landing craft, and he was described as a very bombastic and temperamental character, a fine swordsman, quite a heavy drinker, and a notable womanizer. His rather insane plan almost beggars belief. The captain was certain that the airfields would be lightly defended by service troops. He and his men would move southwards, destroying B-29 bombers as they passed, climb Mount Sotobachi and tear down the Stars and Stripes, and then replace it with the rising sun as an inspiration to all the Japanese troops upon the island. However, this never came to be. The determined defenders, bolstered by heavy artillery and machine gun fire, repelled the assault, resulting in approximately 800 Japanese casualties. Under relentless pressure, in a shrinking area where most critical terrain features had been seized, the disorganized Japanese forces saw a fleeting opportunity to escape destruction, raid American-controlled airfields, and reclaim Mount Sotobachi with this counterattack. However, this disastrous failure depleted Senda's remaining strength and chances for continued resistance. The following day, Cates resumed the offensive with the 23rd Marines making major gains along their front, while Jordan's 3rd Battalion achieved a notable breakthrough of 300 yards. Furthermore, the Provisional Battalion was disbanded, and Lanigan's 2nd Battalion assumed control of the amphitheater Turkey Knob region. Within the center, Erskine persisted in his advance towards the sea, with patrols from the 9th and 21st Marines successfully reaching the beach as American forces continued to secure the area. Meanwhile, to the left, Rocky faced significant resistance, with his troops soon coming under intense and precise fire from elevated positions extending southeast from Kitano Point. Consequently, the 26th and 27th Marines remained in a stalemate while the 28th Marines moved forward. On March the 10th, Liveridge's men advanced approximately 40 yards across extremely challenging terrain and against fierce opposition, while Graham's 2nd Battalion gained an additional 75 yards with the rest of the 26th and 27th Marines still held in place. Over the past 14 days, Rocky's 5th Marine Division advanced 3,000 yards along the west coast, ultimately pushing Kuribayashi's forces into a final pocket at the northern tip of the island. In a dispatch to Tokyo on March the 10th, General Kuribayashi summed up the Japanese situation in this manner. Although the attacks of the enemy against our northern districts are continuing day and night, our troops are still fighting bravely and holding their positions thoroughly. 200 or 300 American infantrymen with several tanks attacked Tenzan all day. The enemy's bombardments from one battleship or cruiser, 11 destroyers and aircraft are very severe, especially the bombing and machine gun fire against divisional headquarters from 30 fighters and bombers are so fierce that I cannot express nor write it here. Not until 15 bloody days later did the Marines eliminate the last pocket of organized enemy resistance in the northern end of the island. By D+19, all that remained for the enemy force was to fight and die for the Emperor. This advance came at a significant cost, with Rocky suffering 1,098 men killed and 2,974 wounded during this time. Within the center, the 21st Marines reported that all organized resistance in their area had been eliminated, while the 9th Marines moved towards the beach facing harassment from enemy fire from a resisting pocket on their right. Nevertheless, Erskine's 3rd Marine Division successfully secured the airfield areas and only needed to eliminate this last remaining pocket in their zone. However, personal losses during this 14-day campaign was substantial, with Erskine losing 831 men killed and 2,241 wounded. Finally, Cates took over from the 24th Marines as he initiated his final offensive eastward. Consequently, the 23rd Marines advanced southeast with minimal resistance, covering approximately 700 yards before stopping at a strategic high ground about 500 yards from the beach, while patrols moved towards the coast near Tachiwa Point. Simultaneously, Lanigan's 1st and 3rd Battalions pushed 600 yards southeast against stronger opposition and successfully occupied key terrain southwest of Higashi. Meanwhile, the 2nd Battalion advanced northeast to join them, effectively driving the remaining enemy forces into a small pocket in that area. Over the last 14 days, Cates' 4th Marine Division engaged in relentless assaults, fighting fiercely from Charlie Dog Ridge past Hill 382, the amphitheater, Turkey Knob, through Minami, and the formidable defenses northeast of Hill 382, nearly reaching the coast. The Japanese conducted an astute defense in the sector. General Kuribayashi had planned well, but much of the credit for the execution of the plan in the 4th Marine Divisional Zone must go to General Senda, who commanded the 2nd Mixed Brigade and exercised tactical control during the battle. Enemy weapons and minefields were well placed to take maximum advantage of the terrain features. Fire control was excellent when judged by Japanese standards, and camouflage discipline was outstanding. Machine gun positions controlled draws, while motors were disposed to deliver fire on routes of approach, including the crests, forward, and reverse slopes of the ridges. The one obvious mistake made by the Japanese in this long, grueling defense to the death was the night counterattack of March the 8th. This action cost them many lives and gained absolutely no advantage. Even this rather hopeless plunge can be somewhat justified, however, when the situation that existed then is seen from the Japanese point of view. By March the 8th, the enemy was under heavy constant pressure in an ever-shrinking area where most of the critical terrain features had already been captured. He was quickly becoming disposed and disorganized, with few courses of action remaining. Because communications were undoubtedly badly disrupted, it is possible the Japanese facing the 4th Division did not realize just how hopeless this cause appeared, and therefore harbored some slight hope that the counterattack might have not been in vain. The cost, however, was significant, with Kate suffering 848 men killed and 2,836 wounded. Now, while the battle raged over Iwo Jima, General LeMay was also preparing for a major raid on Tokyo known as Operation Meeting House. After a precision strike by 192 B-29 bombers against Musashi on March the 4th, which resulted in minimal damage due to heavy cloud cover, a decision was made to move away from the 21st Bomber Command's traditional focus on precision bombing. The 8th fiasco at Musashi marked the end of the well-defined phase of the 28th Bomber Command's operations. The effort to knock out the Japanese aircraft industry by high-altitude, daylight precision bombing of carefully selected targets had completely failed. Production of aircraft engines, not grossly off-scheduled programs when 21st Bomber Command came to the Marianas, fell off sharply during the last 2 months of 1944, and production of aircraft declined slightly during the same period. In either case, however, could the shortages be accounted for by destruction wrought by the B-29s. Indeed, the output of Franks and Ota had decreased from 300 a month to 100 before the first airstrike. Not one of the 9 high-priority targets had been destroyed, although Akashi had been effectively crippled and production had been slowed down at Mitsubishi's engine assembly plants at Nagoya and Nakajima Ota. Musashi had suffered only 4% damage after 835 B-29 sorties had been sent against it. Navy planes had done more harm in a single strike. Probably the indirect effects of B-29 raids were more important. With the fall of Saipan, Japanese industrialists had begun to lose confidence in their supposed immunity from air attack. Although under governmental pressure for increased production, they began with the first attacks in Nakajima and Mitsubishi to hunt for underground or forest cover, and the official directive for dispersal, issued in mid-January, merely served to quicken a process already well on the way. This radical change in manufacturing techniques, never as efficiently conducted as a similar movement in Germany had been, explains in part the slowdown in production in late 1944 and early 1945. In 22 missions comprising over 2,148 sorties, the command dropped nearly 6,000 tons of bombs on Japan, targeting the Imperial aircraft industry, but only about half of the bombers actually hit primary targets. Losses were substantial, largely due to fierce enemy interceptors and the lengthy overwater journey from the Marianas to Japan, which lacked any friendly bases for refueling or repair. As a result of the high costs associated with unescorted daylight missions, the susceptibility of Japanese cities to incendiary attacks, and the minimal impact of precision bombing with high explosives, General Arnold ultimately opted for a comprehensive incendiary campaign. In preparation for the forthcoming assault on Okinawa, LeMay was tasked with initiating a series of intensive incendiary strikes from low altitudes. This lower bombing altitude would enhance accuracy, increase bomb load, and prolong the lifespan of B-29 engines. Although this approach carried risks, LeMay believed that the intense Japanese anti-aircraft fire was not overly threatening, as only 2 B-29s had been lost due to flak alone. He also decided to conduct these missions at night, which would decrease the likelihood of heavy cloud cover and strong winds, simplifying navigation, and enabling the bombers to reach the 2 new emergency airstrips at Iwo Jima by dawn. The first mission was set to commence immediately, with 334 B-29s from the 73rd, 313th, and 314th Bombardment Wings taking off in the late afternoon of March the 9th, carrying approximately 2,000 tons of bombs. The target was a rectangular area in northeastern Tokyo known as Zone 1, measuring about 4 by 3 miles and encompassing most of Asakusa, Honjo, and the Fukagawa wards. After a turbulent journey, the initial pathfinders successfully identified their targets under favorable weather conditions and marked them shortly after midnight with fires. However, LeMay's decision came quite late. With the first mission set for night of March the 9th, the field orders were not cut until the 8th. Although operational details would vary significantly from normal practice, there was no time to consult Washington, as was so frequently done. Arnold was not even informed of the revolutionary plans until the day before the mission. The decision to attack at night ruled out the command standard technique of lead cruise bombing. Formation flying at night was not feasible, and with flak rather than enemy fighters as the chief danger, a tight formation would be a handicap rather than a source of defensive strength. With the planes bombing individually from low altitudes, bomb loads could be sharply increased to an average of about 6 tons per plane. Lead Squadron B-29s carried about 180 times 70-pound M47 napalm film bombs calculated to start appliance fires, as they were known. That is, fires requiring the attention of motorized firefighting equipment. Other planes bombing on these Pathfinders were loaded with 24 times 500-pound clusters of M69s. Interval emitters were set at 100 feet for the Pathfinders, 50 feet for the other planes. The latter setting was supposed to give a minimum density of 25 tons. That's about 8,333 M69s per square mile. Late reports indicated widespread fires that forced formations to search extensively for targets, with visibility severely hampered by smoke and bomb runs complicated by turbulence from intense heat waves. During the 3-hour assault, a total of 279 B-29 bombers targeted Tokyo, successfully dropping 1,665 short tons of bombs on primary targets. Additionally, 19 superfortresses unable to reach Tokyo attacked alternative targets as last means resorts. The Japanese were taken completely by surprise by this tactical shift, resulting in only moderate resistance. Intense anti-aircraft fire destroyed about 14 B-29s and damaged another 42. While enemy interceptors had gained no significant effect. The fires were so intense they nearly extinguished themselves by mid-morning, only halted by wide gaps like rivers. Subsequent photography revealed that 15.8 square miles had been devastated, including 18% of the industrial sector, 63% of the commercial area, and the core of the densely populated residential district. Tokyo's highly effective firefighting system was completely caught off guard, leading to the destruction of 95 fire engines and the deaths of over 125 firefighters, while lightweight buildings were completely consumed along with their contents. Little rubble remained. Only a few fire-resistant structures marked by heat damage stood in the devastated areas. In total, 171 buildings were destroyed. 83,793 people lost their lives, 40,918 were injured, and 1,008,005 were left homeless. Moreover, it took 25 days to recover all the bodies from the debris. Radio Tokyo referred to the raid as slaughter bombing, with one broadcast stating, "The sea of flames engulfed the residential and commercial districts of Tokyo, was reminiscent of the Holocaust of Rome, caused by Emperor Nero." The attack significantly undermined the morale of Japanese civilians, and along with other firebombing raids in March, it led many to believe that the war situation was worse than their government had acknowledged. In response, the Japanese government implemented a mix of repression, including severe penalties for those accused of disloyalty or spreading rumors, and launched an ineffective propaganda campaign aimed at restoring confidence in the nation's air and civil defense efforts. Meanwhile, LeMay and Arnold viewed the operation as a considerable success. As Tokyo mourned their losses, another 313 B-29s were sent on an afternoon on March 11th to execute a similar strike on Nagoya. However, due to minimal wind to spread the fires from the widely dispersed bombs, the results were less impressive. Nonetheless, only one B-29 was lost during this raid, with another 20 sustaining some damage. It became evident, as LeMay predicted, that the Japanese lacked effective tactics for nighttime interception. But now we need to shift our attention over to Burma to report on the ongoings of the China-British-Indian offensives going on there. On General Slim's primary front, General Stopford's 33rd Corps continued its vigorous advance towards Mandalay, while General Cohen's 17th Indian Division successfully made its way to Milla to attack the Japanese rear. In response, Generals Kimura and Katamura sent several reinforcements to this crucial area, but only the 1st Battalion, 168th Regiment, led by Colonel Yoshida, managed to arrive in time to establish some defenses in the town, quickly transforming buildings in Milla into bunkers and strongpoints. On February 28th, Cohen dispatched the 63rd Brigade to launch an attack from the west, and the 48th Brigade to advance from the north along the Malang-Milla Road, while the 255th Tank Brigade executed a wide flanking maneuver to approach from the east. As a result, the 63rd Brigade secured Kwakpugan and set up a roadblock southwest of Mctilla. The 48th Brigade advanced to a bridge over the Chong, approximately a mile from the town. And the 255th Brigade fought its way to Kigan and Kanda, successfully destroying several bunkers near Point 860. On March the 1st, following a heavy air and artillery bombardment, Cohen's three brigades began to push into Mctilla despite fierce resistance. The 48th Brigade, bolstered by a tank squadron, advanced down the Mandalay-Mctilla road, quickly clearing Kigong before entering the town, where they were reaching within 100 yards of the railroad line before the attack was halted in late afternoon. Over to the east, the majority of the 255th Tank Brigade captured Point 860, began clearing the camouflage bunkers along the ridgeline, while a combined force of tanks and grenadiers advanced to within 200 yards of the railroad station before being recalled. Meanwhile, the 63rd Brigade, supported by a tank squadron, cleared the village of Kana and continued past it to secure the railroad line and the main Kwangpadang-Mctilla road. The following day, the 17th Indian Division tightened its encirclement around Mctilla, inflicting significant casualties on the very outnumbered defenders and destroying numerous enemy bunkers. On March the 3rd, the three brigades commenced the task of eliminating the last remaining Japanese forces in and around Mctilla. They faced intense sniper and machine gun fire from every single building. However, due to the tank's superior firepower, the Japanese strongholds were systematically taken down one by one. By the end of the day, the town was cleared, with an estimated 2,000 Japanese troops killed, including Colonel Yoshida. Additionally, 47 field pieces and anti-tank guns were captured, and the supply dumps surrounding Mctilla were secured. Cohen now needed to organize the town's defenses, anticipating a swift and fierce Japanese counterattack. Immediately after the town's capture, Kimura ordered the 18th Division to work with the weakened 49th Division to reclaim Mctilla, while Katamura reinforced General Naka with the majority of the 119th and 214th Regiments, a strong artillery unit, and the battered 14th Tank Regiment. Following the capture of Mctilla, Cohen's forces spent the next few days clearing the area of any remaining snipers and stragglers. For the town's defense, Cohen assigned each brigade and the divisional infantry to 4 sectors, each featuring a heavily fortified redoubt. He also tasked the 99th Brigade with defending Kigang and Mctilla's airfield. To maintain the initiative for the 17th Division, Cohen aggressively deployed strong mobile columns of tanks, mechanized artillery, and infantry to disrupt the Japanese formations as they approached Mctilla. Consequently, while the 18th and 49th Divisions advanced, Yuandan and Yonggang were secured on March the 5th. In the following days, the main roads leading to Malang, Kwangpadang, Piaobui, Tazi, and Mandalay were all cleared. The enemy units of the 214th Regiment at Tongongyi and Yigo were successfully repelled on March the 8th. General Naka was now prepared to initiate his primary assault on Mctilla, instructing his units to concentrate their efforts north of the town, while the 214th Regiment made an unsuccessful attempt to move southwest to connect with the 49th Division. In response to these movements, on March the 10th, Cohen sent a robust tank infantry force along the Malang Road to escort a previously dispatched column back to Mctilla, successfully inflicting significant casualties on the 56th Regiment as the British Indians secured the Lendao, Kiang Yagon area. However, the troops faced harassment from artillery fire originating south of Yandaogan Lake, prompting Cohen to launch another armored sweep on March the 14th to eliminate this threat. Although the 55th Regiment managed to capture the hill north of Mctilla after Cohen's tanks and infantry withdrew, the Japanese forces were unable to prevent their return, which resulted in further heavy losses. Concurrently, other tank infantry units disrupted the advance of the 49th Division, effectively delaying the assembly of Japanese forces to the south and east of Mctilla until March 18th. Alongside that, a strong raid by the Komatsabura unit was successfully repelled on March 14th. At Stafford Sector, the 19th Division was preparing to launch its final offensive southwards, towards Mandalay, while the 2nd and 20th Divisions, after some very fierce fighting, expanded their bridgeheads and were advancing east to assault the southern approaches to Mandalay. With close support from artillery and aircraft, General Reese's forces successfully breached the primary defenses of Lieutenant General Yamamoto Kiyoue's 15th Division, reaching the northern outskirts of Mandalay by March the 7th. As the assault continued, British Indian forces were set to enter the city on March the 9th. However, the determined defenders clung to Mandalay Hill and Fort Dufferin, aiming to extend the conflict and fight to the bitter death. Now, while Mandalay was under siege, the 62nd Brigade stealthily advanced east to Mamyo on March 11th, catching its garrison completely off guard. The next day, Mandalay Hill ultimately fell while Fort Dufferin had been heavily bombarded within the city. By mid-March, the 2nd Division was nearing the capture of Iwo, and the 20th Division was steadily advancing east to sever the supply routes from Mandalay to the south. Over in northern Burma, General Sultan was also pursuing his own offensive. After establishing the bridgehead at Mitsun, General Festing's 36th British Division faced minimal resistance and successfully took Mongmit on March 9th before continuing southwards for Mongok. Further east, the 38th Chinese Division encountered only weak delaying positions as it moved towards Lashio, which was successfully occupied by March 7th. At this point, the 56th Division, now independently commanding this area, was gradually retreating towards Hispa and Kwakme, although General Sun paused his advance until the Generalissimo granted permission to resume the offensive later that month. Mauban feared that if more Chinese troops were withdrawn from Burma, it might not be possible to take Rangoon before the monsoon rains began. This was an unpleasant prospect, so Mauban went straight to Chongqing on March 8th for 2 days of conference with the Generalissimo. When the conference of March 9th concluded, the Generalissimo, according to American minutes, said he would recapitulate his decision of halting the Chinese advance at Lashio. In doing so, he remarked that the details of withdrawal would be settled later and that no final decisions would be made before General Wendemeyer was able to take part in them. Then he stated that unless there was a simultaneous amphibious attack on Rangoon, operations would stop at Lashio and Mandalay, and the Allies would assume the defensive. The Chinese would stop at Lashio, but details of their operations between Lashio and Mandalay would be settled later between the staffs. The misunderstanding became quite apparent in mid-March when General Sultan, under whose command the Chinese were, received conflicting orders. Mauban ordered Sultan to move his forces southwest towards Mandalay, yet the Generalissimo directed the Chinese divisions to stay in the Lashio area. As a kind of compromise, and to avoid having the Chinese wait idly around Lashio, Sultan suggested that a smaller task force be directed to proceed south. However, the Generalissimo and his American advisors stood firm, lest the shift of troops to China be delayed. This in turn caused the British to believe that if the Chinese were not going to advance, they should be withdrawn forthwith and end the burden of the line of communications. The 50th Chinese Division began to push south after securing the Namtu region, and by mid-March they reached Hispa. Meanwhile, in South Burma, the 82nd West African Division had taken Dalet, while the 25th Indian Division engaged in a struggle for control over the Ruwa Tamandu area. Additionally, the 2nd West African Brigade was advancing inland towards An, posing a significant threat to the Japanese rear areas. Due to the rapid advance of Slim's offensive, Admiral Mauban had prioritized air supply for the 14th Army. This situation soon compelled General Christensen to send the 25th Indian Division back over to India, as his logistical support was becoming increasingly strained. Capturing Tamandu and establishing a forward maintenance area there became quite essential. After successfully clearing Dokukan, the 74th Indian Brigade crossed the Muchang on March 4th to circumvent the main enemy defenses. The British Indians pressed on, launching attacks on Tamandu the following days. The determined defenders put up strong resistance. Eventually, General Miyazaki withdrew most of the 111th Regiment and ordered it to attack the 2nd West African Brigade from the rear, which was finally contained by March 17th. With the 25th Division scheduled to withdraw to Akyab by the end of the month, the 74th was reassigned to the 82nd West African Division, and they launched a final assault upon Tamandu on March 11th, successfully capturing this abandoned objective. The British Indians then began to advance towards Gualan, reaching the vicinity of the town by mid-March. Simultaneously, the 154th Regiment counterattacked the West Africans at Dalet, successfully halting the enemy's advance beyond the river. Meanwhile, the 4th Indian Brigade landed at May, near the Let Pan, on March 13th from Ramri Island and established a roadblock to prevent enemy escape. In response, the 121st Regiment sent several companies to conduct a delaying action aimed at slowing the enemy's southward advance. I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. Hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at The Age of Conquest, the Fall and Rise of China podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel, found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War, found on major podcast platforms. We aren't able to cover it in depth here, but there is a missing part of the story. You had heard at the last few paragraphs me talk about Ramri Island. An infamous myth occurred on Ramri Island where it was alleged thousands of Japanese were eaten by saltwater crocodiles. If you want to hear the truth about this myth, please go over to the Pacific War Channel over on YouTube and check out my episode on the myth of the Ramree Island Massacre. Likewise, if you prefer a podcast, you can go over to Echoes of War and you can find it over there. If you'd like to further support me, please check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast, early access to all of my content, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. The latest exclusive episode is how the Sicilian Mafia helped the Allies win World War II. The battle for Iwo Jima intensified as the Marines advanced against fortified Japanese positions, facing heavy resistance and suffering significant casualties, while capturing key terrain over several weeks of fierce combat. Meanwhile, General LeMay shifted from precision bombing to incendiary raids on Tokyo, resulting in significant destruction and civilian casualties, while Japanese morale plummeted amidst military setbacks.